Make sure the audio levels are good. Alright, welcome to episode 113, I believe, of Trek Live. In this week's episode, we're going to be talking about some TNG movies. Bill, how are you doing this morning, and why are we talking about TNG this morning? Or whenever you listen to this.
Doing really well. Going on vacation tomorrow. Going on shore leave, I guess you could say. So I'm looking forward to that. And yeah, we're talking about TNG movies this week. I think it's an appropriate time to do it because it's the week of Star Trek Picard. It premieres on Thursday. The TNG movies are the last things we have seen of Picard in the lead up to that show. Oh, cool. Rob's here. Welcome, Rob.
Welcome, Rob.
Yeah, so I think it's appropriate to take this opportunity to maybe look at where we left off with Captain Picard in the lead up to seeing where he is next at this point in his life. So, yeah, this is going to be very unstructured. We didn't commit to this with any kind of like concrete plan to cover each movie equally or to like go deep on this movie or that movie. Just going to kind of see where the conversation takes us.
Knowing Bill, he's going to ask all of us to rank them, so just be ready for that.
I very well might.
And I think we're probably going to stay away from going too deep into Nemesis, because I think, if I remember correctly, we've done an episode on Nemesis. And maybe,
we have.
I don't know, some other ones. But,
yeah.
Yeah, before we get started, Bill, how's your rewatch going?
It's going. I watched, what did I watch this week? I watched The Vengeance Factor, which is a kind of a weird episode of season 3. It's an episode from the early part of season 3 that feels the closest to me to sort of a kind of a throwback to what season 1 and 2 sort of felt like. That's an episode that feels like it's almost more at home in the first and second season portion of the show, as opposed to the third. It's got some cool production values, though. It's got some really neat cinematography, some cool. I picked the costume design for the MVP. There's some really detailed, really cool costumes on the gatherers, like really rugged, like messy. Everybody's got like a different outfit that is like pieced together by stuff these guys have stolen over the years. There's some interesting stuff in it, but it's certainly not a favorite. And then I watched The Defector, which I think is a really good episode, and a good one in the lead up to Picard too, because it deals heavily with the Romulans and Picard's sort of facing off with them. I think it's a TNG classic, The Defector. I give it an A on my rewatch review, and I talked about the fact that I think what makes it a classic is that it builds on the canon, on the continuity of Star Trek. It builds on the sort of mythology of the Romulans and the conflict between the Federation and the Romulans, and it's very focused on character. It's this really cool character study of this Romulan guy who is disenchanted and feels like the Empire's going in the wrong direction, but still loves the Romulan people. You know, he doesn't think he's disloyal. He thinks he's trying to save the Romulans, and it's also it's got a cool plot. Like it's a cool political thriller kind of story. So it does everything. Like it hits all the check boxes. So I think it's one of the better. It's probably the best episode of season 3 that I've watched to this point.
Okay.
So
nice.
One extreme and the other, episode that I'm not so fond of, and one that I really love, the Factor.
Yeah.
We got Ian here too. Welcome, Ian.
Welcome, Ian.
Yeah. What about you? How about your rewatch? Have you watched in the last week or so?
I have been bad. I have not watched anything.
Okay.
I've just been busy with a bunch of other stuff. It snowed this week. In my sector, that happens not often, so it kind of turns everything on its side. But I will comment on your episodes, I guess.
Sure.
The Vengeance Factor. I feel like it's like you said, it's season 2 leftovers. Like I feel like they had a leftover script or an idea, and they're like, let's just plug that in there. But The Defector is pretty good, and I'm curious to see if that maybe Romulan stuff will play into Star Trek Picard. So, yeah. I will be better
Yeah,
next week.
yeah, we're gonna find out. Um, so I guess we should just talk about TNG movies.
Yes, let's do it.
What are your overall? I know we've kind of talked off air, probably even more so than on air. You haven't spent a whole lot of time with the TNG movies in your time with Trek. What's your overall take on them? Do you think they're? Is that because you don't think they're like? Do you not find them good? Do you not think they're successful? Do you just think of TNG as more of a TV entity? Like, talk a little bit about your general thoughts on
general thoughts.
the four movies.
I think I just consider TNG just to be on TV and not just on the big screen. The reason why I probably haven't watched it as much is because it is, at least for TNG goes, it's a smaller sample size. Like there's only I believe 4 movies, right? And I think one of them, only one to me is I would want to come back and watch, and if that maybe kind of shed some light on how I enjoyed those movies, maybe we'll get into. But just when I think of TNG, I'd rather watch it on TV or the show TNG proper. That's what I kind of consider TNG proper than the movies. So, what about you?
And I think that's a pretty common. The TNG movies I think are sort of a mixed bag, and I think part of it is, I think the original series was inherently it was an inherently easier transition for that show to make its way to the big screen. It was built as a sort of a triumvirate. The characters is a 3 triangle that the relationships there are easy to sort of transition to a big screen adventure. It's I think the Next Generation being structurally a more ensemble show, the way the Next Generation sort of evolves and becomes the most successful version of itself in the meaty part of the run is it's taking advantage of the full cast. They're all involved for the most part, and they're on this kind of rotational character spotlight kind of episode structure. This week's a Worf episode, next week's a Crusher episode, then we get a Picard show. So I think that it's harder to capture what a lot of people loved about the Next Generation on a movie in a cinematic format, and I think that's evident in these movies. I think the movies are very heavily focused on Picard and Data, in sort of the way the TOS movies are very obviously focused on Kirk and Spock. But that's the way that show was. There was no sort of change really there. So the TNG movies I think had a tougher ask, the more uphill battle to find a comfort zone, living in the movie universe. Now we have Dom here, who was at the Star Trek Picard premiere and saw the first episode already. So, we have millions of questions that we'll avoid asking you, I think,
next week.
Out of fear. But welcome, Dom. Rob saying he loves the TNG movies, loves the action, humor, drama, and in some cases the episodic feel to them. And that's something I want to talk about, the episodic feel to them. I remember going to see Insurrection at the cinema. Loved it. It was his first Star Trek experience in the movie theater for Rob. Ian says the movies should have had Picard with Crusher. They should have evolved that relationship. Those are the kinds of things. Yeah, we're getting a lot of good material here to kind of run with, and a lot of things I'm kind of eager to talk about.
One thing at a time.
But, one thing I'll sort of latch onto with Rob is this idea that the movies are episodic, and I do appreciate that about them. I think if you look at the four movies, they all have a very distinctive tone. They all have very different feels, vibes to them. They don't feel cookie cutter necessarily, to me at least. I think Insurrection is very different than Nemesis, which is very different from Generations. I like that about them, that they're as different from each other as a lot of the TOS movies are too. I think that's an asset that series has. But go ahead. If,
I don't want to come off as not liking them. I want to
Mhm.
talk about what I like about them. I think anytime you have opportunity to go on the big screen, it allows you to do big things. So, I think most of the movies have big sci-fi concepts, which I like. You guys know that. It allows them to, they get a new ship. It looks great, new uniforms. So there are some good things, and I think that the stories are pretty solid as well. Maybe 3 out of the 4, but yeah, I just want to get that out there. That there are things that I do like about them.
Sure.
Yeah.
Generations. I'm kind of eager to talk about Generations, maybe to start, since it's the first of them, and it's sort of a we've talked about before that TNG really had at the end of its run sort of a unique challenge that the other shows really didn't have. When DS9 and Voyager and even Enterprise were ending, they knew they were ending, and that there wasn't going to be like an immediate next adventure to set up. Where the Next Generation had to be final for the series and give a sense of
But they knew.
closure and wrapping up, but they knew they were going right into a movie,
Yeah.
so they couldn't end it with any kind of real sense of finality. And they couldn't do a lot of the things that Deep Space Nine, for example, chose to do with like sending the crew off into their own different directions and really like wrapping up some relationships and
Yeah.
and putting the bow on things. So All Good Things is certainly a unique animal on that level, and then Generations, by extension, is too. It's picking up the baton from something that literally really just ended. Uh, so Generations to me is the movie that I have the hardest time, and maybe the Star Trek property, the Star Trek thing, that I have the hardest time like separating my nostalgic like experience in the build up to it and seeing it from the product itself, like the final product of it. Generations is a movie that I think struggles at times with um, removing itself from the it's well done. They obviously decided early on that they wanted to have Kirk involved. They wanted it to be like the passing of the torch from TOS to TNG. They wanted to do away with the Enterprise D and get new sets and build a new have a new ship for the movie series. So they had these things that they wanted to accomplish, and they had to sort of reverse engineer a story and a plot to kind of accomplish the things that they wanted to accomplish. Is my interpretation, at least from reading what I've read.
Yeah.
And I think that's a unique challenge that movie faces, and I think it succeeds on some levels, and it's a hindrance on others. But being a 7-year-old kid who was in love with the Next Generation, going to see that is a really strong memory. I've talked about before. Star Trek 6 is the first movie I believe I ever saw in a movie theater.
Yeah.
Star Trek Generations is the first movie that I remember like being pumped to see for like weeks and months ahead of time, seeing the trailer and being really excited. It's going to be Kirk and Picard together. It's going to be the Enterprise D on the big screen, the show that I've loved. I was old enough to kind of comprehend what I was getting into. So those two things are kind of hard for me to reconcile. It's the thing that I have the hardest time being objective about, maybe in the whole Star Trek universe. I have really fond memories of seeing it. There are things in it that I love. I think it looks great. I think there are sequences in it that are really great. I like the destruction in the Enterprise D. I think the mechanics of how it happens are kind of silly with the bird of prey taking it down, but the visuals there, the action of it, the score, I think are really, really exciting. And there's just something cool about seeing Kirk and Picard together, I think, that scratches an itch for me. And I'm glad it exists, even though I think it's flawed and has issues. I think there are production things like the mix of the uniforms being together. Although last week we talked about, I think it was last week on the show, your vision of the uniform differences are kind of practical. That some people would wear this uniform while maybe officers are wearing others. Like in a real world situation, maybe there is some difference in the uniforms.
Yeah.
And Generations actually kind of shows that for better or worse.
Oh yeah, I can fix that in my head canon.
yeah, exactly. It's the only time you ever see it. And I think it's done. It's certainly done as like almost it's a production limitation forces their hand to do that.
Yeah.
But it's I can get there in my head to reason that out and just live with it. And one of the interesting questions that I see Rob and the guys in the chat are actually kind of already answering it. First Contact, I posted a poll earlier this week about what's your favorite TNG movie? And the last time I looked at it, it was like 85%, 90% First Contact, which is to be expected. The really interesting question is, and Nemesis is typically the least of them. The interesting question to have is, do you prefer Insurrection or Generations? I see Dom is a Generations guy. Ian and Rob are going with Insurrection. So
I'm an Insurrection guy.
Dan's an Insurrection guy.
It's tough with Generations because I get, all the things they wanted to accomplish with passing the torch and building new sets but I just think I really prefer Insurrection over Generations, just because I think it's such an underrated story. I think a lot of people, it's like one of the, I guess, I don't know, we may have titled it, the forgotten TNG film, because I feel like it's not quoted as much. Because I think it gets...
Generations has a bigger presence in the fandom for sure, and I think it has a bigger like pop culture footprint because of the Picard stuff than Insurrection does.
Yeah, but I think it gets kind of forgotten because it gets sandwiched between a really great film, in my opinion, and a not very great film. So,
true, very true.
Yeah.
Yeah, I agree with that, and I think Insurrection, the most common take on Insurrection, kind of moving to Insurrection, I guess. We're gonna bounce around. I don't. Like I said, we're not structured here on Trek Live. So we're not super scripted. Insurrection is certainly the movie that gets the most commonly. It's the most commonly labeled as an episode on the big screen. It's just a big screen version of an episode. TNG would have done that better. Or it's a 2-part episode that they just kind of jury rigged into a movie. And I don't really agree with that. I think there's some truth to it on some levels, but I think it's more. I think it just captures what TNG did as a show. I don't know that I think there is some big screen juice in there. I think some of the location photography, they're outside in this big wide open vistas on mountaintops, and this huge outdoor set that Edwin Zimmerman built for the Baku village. Really impressive stuff they certainly couldn't have done on the TV show.
No.
From a production standpoint. The Sona ships are like really cool sets, totally different. There's nothing stock about those sets and those aliens. There's money dumped into that movie. It's certainly not, it's not as impressively mounted as First Contact is, for one. But I think there's some cool production design stuff going on in that movie. I think there are some cool action set pieces. I don't know that the visual effects hold up as well as Generations do. I think Generations is on ILM. Generations was done by ILM, and I think those visual effects are really, really, really strong. Insurrection was not done by Industrial Light and Magic. I don't remember which company did it, but there's a definite difference there. I think some of the visuals in that don't necessarily stand up as well. But I like the comforting feel. Looking it up, I like the comforting, warm blanket feel of this is the TNG I know that Insurrection kind of gives off. I also like the audacity of this is a kind of double-edged sword thing I'm about to say. Objectively speaking, if you're sitting there watching Insurrection. I'm going to take it back. Actually, no, I've struggled with this for a long time.
Just get it
the way
out there.
Insurrection. Yeah, I'm just going to say it. I struggle a little bit with Insurrection's portrayal of Starfleet and the Federation choosing to do what it's doing. I don't know that it fully earns the choice to do what they're doing to the Baku. And I think if you're a hardcore Star Trek fan and you're watching it in continuity, Insurrection takes place during the Dominion War, during the 7th season of Deep Space Nine. You can certainly reason that Starfleet and the Federation's eye is on a different ball, and this side project in this corner of the galaxy with the Sona and the Baku is bad decisions can get made and things can get skirted under the rug. I can certainly reason that, but I don't know. I
get that. I get that too. I think that's one of the things that brings that film down is that kind of I'm just on the fence of how I feel, kind of how they handled that.
Yeah, but what is satisfying is putting Picard in a position to stand up for the values of the Federation and doing the right thing. That's TNG in a nutshell, really.
Yeah.
That's what Picard does the whole time. Whenever, and there's certainly examples in the Next Generation of Picard doing that. He stands up to Starfleet officials in The Offspring. I talk about that moment a lot, where he stands up to the Admiral and says, "Not on my ship. Stand your ground, Mr. Data. You're not taking law with you." That he's done it before, and Starfleet's made mistakes before, and that's why at the end of the day, the more I think about it, the more I come down positively, and I can deal with the questions that Insurrection poses. The drumhead, even Picard has to take a similar stance against the Federation official who has a lot of gravitas and power, who's on the wrong path, going the wrong way. So I appreciate the connective tissue that Insurrection has with the series, and that the dilemmas the crew faces and Picard is specifically facing are so consistent with what the Next Generation challenges us to think about, and it feels a piece with the show, which is why I think it gets hit with the label. It just feels like an episode. I think at the end of the day, I come down on the side of that's more an asset than a problem.
So just to kind of backtrack to the CG stuff,
Sure.
it was the first film that didn't use any
practical model.
Practical, right? So there's been CG since I think Wrath of Khan, and but there's always been some practical stuff. This was the first one. A lot of the stuff,
And it shows.
The sets were built redressings of Voyagers, because I think it says that there were just so many. They had 3 months to design and construct 55 full sets.
Wow.
So that's a time crunch. So that's, I guess that can be, a testament to, it's understandable. You're right.
Yeah. For sure. And that's the thing. Like, Insurrection does have some serious scope to it. There are a lot. If you think about it, if you think of the movie like on a scene by scene sort of basis, they're in a lot of different spaces.
Yes.
They're different rooms on different ships and different shuttlecrafts and different places on this planet that they're in or outside of. So the Insurrection has a scope to it that I think I think it might be the most ambitious production of the TNG movies, from that standpoint, and I appreciate it on that level a lot. So for me, with the Generations, Insurrections, I could go either way depending on the day of the week. If I watch them both back to back, I don't know what I would say.
If you had to right now,
yes,
okay,
Generations, because there's so much nostalgic love for it. And
yeah,
I love the cinematography of with Generations. I kind of like I was just saying, I kind of can go back and forth, and I struggle with the Federation Starfleet decisions in Insurrection. The thing that I struggle the most with Generations is this: if you listen to the commentary track on the Generations DVD or Blu-ray, it's Brandon Braga and Ron Moore. They talk a lot about their desire to not go the expected route a few times in the movie. Like, they didn't want to do what the audience is coming in, like, folding their arms going, "Oh, I know this is how they're going to introduce Kirk," or "I know this is how they're going to introduce the ship on the big screen."
Yeah.
Like, the first time you see the Enterprise D crew throwing the holodeck on a ship, like on a naval ship, doing the wharf promotion ceremony, like, they consciously chose not to open the movie with like this big grandiose like battle with the Romulans, like look at the crew coming doing a badass adventure kind of thing. Like they intentionally went the alternative way to do something kind of unexpected that nobody would come in thinking would be the way they would do it. Same thing with introducing Kirk and Picard together. You see them together for the first time. Kirk's chopping wood on the Nexus. In the Nexus, he doesn't want to do any. He's very, and he's like relaxed and wants to just live out a quiet life in the Nexus with his girl. He's making eggs, making breakfast. There's nothing expected about that. Who comes into a movie with thinking, "Oh, Kirk and Picard are going to be together. It's going to be this great thing that they're building up." And most of the time you see them together, they're cooking breakfast. past the oregano is like a line of dialogue between these two characters. I appreciate the intent there, and I appreciate the desire not to do the expected, but at the same time, there is something a little unsatisfying about it a lot of the time too. Like you're only getting 4 movies with these people. It is a big event, and I think they maybe went too far at times with pushing the envelope into, well, we're going to go so extremely not expect that. I think they dipped their toe into unsatisfying territory a couple too many times. I also think in Generations, some of the Data humor can go a little far with the emotion chip malfunctions. I think some of that stuff is a little much.
Yeah.
For me. So yeah, I think both of those movies have issues that I struggle with. So I'm sitting here and I would say Generations, but I'm coming up with more negative things to say about Generations and Insurrection.
Come to the dark side.
I could be easily swayed either way. But if I'm being completely honest, the nostalgic connection with Generations is a tough thing for me to get over. Like I said, it's probably the thing that I have the most difficult time being objective about of anything in the Star Trek universe, really, because of when I saw it and where I was in life at the time, how exciting it was, how much build-up there was.
Let's talk about First Contact.
Okay.
Because I think First Contact has a lot of similarities to Voyage Home in that kind of the sci-fi concept is, we got to go back in time and save the world. But I think they're very different movies also. Like they have some similarities, but they are different too. So, what are your thoughts on Voyage Home? Or not Voyage on First Contact. Sorry.
Yeah, there's certainly connective tissue with Voyage Home and Wrath of Khan, with time travel and this revenge element that the Wrath of Khan really leans heavily into. Picard is in the same sort of mental headspace that Khan is kind of in Wrath of Khan, actually. First Contact's incredibly. I think it does. I think somebody in the chat might have been Ian or Rob. I'm not sure. I'll have to scroll back up when we're done. Like in this first section, you're going just kind of generally talking. I want to go back and look at the chat, or more specifically. But somebody mentioned that the First Contact. I think somebody mentioned the First Contact. Maybe I'm misremembering. I don't know. I'm gonna say First Contact does the best job of utilizing the cast. It does the best job of sort of divvying out the plot.
Yes.
The different characters and giving everybody a moment. It's easy for me to come up with, something cool Dr. Crusher got to do in First Contact, something cool Deanna Troi got to do in First Contact, and Worf got to do in First Contact. I have an easier time doing that with that movie than the other 3. I think it, there's a very clear A, B, C plot sort of structure that is headlined by Picard, Riker, and Data. You have Picard dealing with the Borg and Lily on the ship.
Yep.
Trying to fight back against dealing with his thirst for vengeance and his Moby Dick kind of Captain Ahab stuff. You have Riker on the planet with Zefram Cochrane trying to steer Zefram Cochrane into doing the right thing.
Maintaining the timeline,
making sure it stays on track, and the right choices are being made down there on the planet. And then you have Data with the Borg Queen being tempted to, it's actually
in many different areas.
In many different areas, being tempted, but it's sort of his whole dilemma, though. He's striving to be more human, and here's this, Borg, this cybernetic, entity that views, the lack of humanity as the perfection, where Data's, striving to go the other way. He's kind of put in this position to choose which side he wants to go to. I think it does a really good job of using the cast, and you can't discount the impact on the continuity. Exploring the Star Trek nativity scene, as Braga and Moore call it, and behind the scenes stuff in First Contact, the Vulcan First Contact, sort of setting into motion the entire universe of Star Trek. The whole story kind of starts there. I think the impact on the continuity and setting in motion the entire thing, while also playing on the continuity of TNG, the journey Picard's kind of going on with the Borg, and the trauma of his experience in the best of both worlds and being assimilated, and
Yeah.
choices he made with the Borg going back throughout the show are all interesting things to think about as you watch his journey in that movie. I just think it does the best job of existing as an important part of the Star Trek continuity as a whole, and expanding on what TNG had done, extending that story for the characters, for Data, for Picard, giving Riker fun and interesting things to do, giving the whole cast things to do. I think it's definitely one of my favorite Star Trek movies as a whole, and clearly the most successful effort on TNG's part in that universe, in the movie universe.
Yeah.
There's nothing as cool as, and you can effective and how well the visual effects hold up in scenes like this, but there's nothing as cool in my mind in the other three movies as Picard, Worf, Lieutenant Hawk on the walking on the outside of the ship to the satellite to the deflector dish, and that I remember seeing that in the theater and just being like, wow, like this is like something you've never seen before. It's just flat out cool. There's nothing as bold and exciting as that in the other movies. I think that's a highlight for me, that sequence. It's got iconic stuff in it, makes it a classic.
Yeah.
I mean, would you agree with that? Do you think it's by far the most?
I would agree. I think it's definitely, out of the four, it's definitely the most successful. I think it does a great job of balancing. It is an action type of episode, but also there's some emotional stuff that Picard has to work through, and there's some humor down on the planet.
Yes.
So I think it's great.
There's great lessons there too. It's certainly nothing new, nothing.
No.
Lots of movies, lots of stories that do this thing that they're doing with Zefram Cochrane, this hero worship thing. Everybody idolizes a person in history, and given the opportunity to meet them and see them in the flesh, you're inevitably going to be disappointed by their values, or what they actually are. History is kind of a fickle thing. You never want to trust too much that history books are accurately representing who a person was to their core. And there's a lot of material out there in movie history and TV that explore that idea. But I love the way First Contact handles the Zefram Cochrane character. He's imperfect, even though the crew views him as this sort of landmark figure that did everything right. Rob mentions the Defiant cameo. The First Contact through Nemesis all have this challenge of how do you bring Worf back into the equation. Worf's on Deep Space Nine during First Contact and Insurrection. Nemesis not so much, but he's kind of been sent off in a direction by the end of Deep Space Nine. So like how you bring Worf into the fold for these movies was always an interesting question. And Deep Space Nine, and First Contact, I think obviously does the best job of it.
Yeah.
Big Borg battle. Naturally, the Defiant would be there. Worf's in command of the Defiant. So it's the easiest leap to make that you can get Worf on the ship. The other movies take the wink wink nod nod. He happens to be visiting for this particular day and get sucked into the adventure kind of route. They not a whole lot of time spent on building an actual reason for him to be there, and probably the right move for those movies. But First Contact finds a way to make it exciting and incredible. Geordi gets his new eyes in First Contact. That's an interesting point. No more visor. Last time we've seen visors generations, which is an interesting change. I'm sure that had to be a big decision. Geordi is such the image of Geordi with the visor, such an iconic thing. Like that's so like in the DNA of TNG. To kind of take the visor away.
But I think sort of technology is ever changing, and
true.
I can definitely fix it in my head canon. I've said that a million times, but I definitely like that they
showed some growth,
and not just the character, but like how he looks.
Right.
Bill, something positive about the fourth iteration of TNG movies.
Star Trek Nemesis.
Nemesis, positive. Yes. Something positive.
My favorite thing about Nemesis is the slow walk toward peace with Romulans that's implied. I think one of my favorite things that Star Trek had kind of established by this pattern of, the Klingons were the bad guys in TOS, but that relationship evolved and it's a more complicated, more friendly thing by the time you get to TNG. The Vulcans were adversarial in Enterprise, and obviously that evolves and they become more like the growth of the relationships with these other
Races.
Species. Yes, and the way that Nemesis sort of sets up the possibility for growth there, that there might be some hope by the end of that movie between the Federation and the Romulans. I like that a lot. I like Picard standing in the Romulan Senate chamber and talking about the historical significance of that moment and being conscious of, this is a big deal that I'm even standing here.
Mm-hmm.
I love that aspect of the movie, and I wish, we're going to get something similar, maybe something extension of that moving forward. Star Trek 09 sort of threw a wrench in any like real growth
that did
that by destroying Romulus. That sort of game changes the entire thing and hits the reset button in a kind of way that prevents real extension from that idea. So we're going to get I think a version of it. The growth and the relationship between humanity and the Romulans. I'm sure Don Paris is here, so maybe he can expand without spoilers, or reassure us that maybe there's some elements of that coming. But I like that a lot, and I hope we see that evolve. I mean, what about you? Do you have a thing in Nemesis that you can kind of point to and say, I like that?
I would probably have to say that. Yeah, I think it's a very it's a cool concept. Again, I keep coming back to sci-fi concept, but it's not really this sci-fi concept. It is like the grandiose feeling that Picard, one of the, if not the arguably the most, well-known, captain, is on this planet that a lot of people didn't think could happen. So I think that's, I don't know. I will. That's what I'll say about it. There's some problems that I have with it. I don't know where to start. I think I'll start with something that we usually quote on here is action for the sake of action. There's a lot of moments like that in this, which really bring it down for me. So I'm trying to be as positive as possible.
Yeah, there's definitely an insert action sequence here element to Nemesis, especially in the first half of it. I don't care for the Argo sequence at the beginning of the movie. I feel like that's very, very much a wouldn't this be cool kind of thing, and it feels like an idea spawned by somebody that
When is the wedding? Is it in this?
That's in Nemesis. That's the very beginning.
Okay.
Of Nemesis. Yeah. That's and that to me is it's kind of a missed opportunity. I feel like
just gonna say that.
It feels like it's a missed opportunity. It's an opportunity. It would have been a way to reintroduce these characters. There have been some more time had passed since we had seen them last. Insurrection was 98. Nemesis was 02.
02.
So it's a decent gap there.
4 years.
4 years. Yeah. The other movies were 2 years. So it was the longest we've gone without seeing them. And sort of, I would have liked to have seen like an extended sequence. I know, obviously, commercial, and that's not that's a tough sell for a Star Trek Nemesis to spend a whole lot of time like weaving through a wedding and using that like the way the Deer Hunter did to like introduce the characters or reintroduce the characters in this case. To see what they've been doing, what's been going on in their lives, and I feel like that would have been a cool way to kick off that movie, but it really isn't. There's not a whole lot of there. The other thing I'll say about Nemesis, on a somewhat positive note, and you see some of this in the wedding stuff, and in the first chunk of that movie before things go sideways with Shinzon and the reveal of who he is and how he is and all that stuff.
Yeah.
But I do kind of like the arc of Picard. Throughout these movies, I think you see Picard, more comfortable, more cozy in his place in life than he ever was in TNG. I feel like that's an extension of TNG. It ends with him coming in to play poker with the crew and realizing he should have done this a long time ago, and that he is a part of this family.
Yeah.
He can be a participating member of this dynamic, and he kind of finds his comfort zone there by the end of the show. And then I think in Nemesis, seeing him be Riker's best man and giving a speech in a very loose, relaxed kind of place. Having fun on the Argo, even though, like that scene, he's smiling, he's having a good time. Like that to me, like represents the growth that Picard has kind of. Look at him in Encounter at Farpoint, where he's super rigid and
stone cold. Picard,
stone cold all the time. And then you look at him in Nemesis, where he's laughing, having a good time,
smiles,
really feeling like he's a part of the family, of the crew. He's emotional about people moving on and leaving. That I like that. I think that's a successful thing in that movie if you're prepared to look for it.
Would you say that's the biggest takeaway we're going to get from the TNG movies into Star Trek Picard, that this or was this going to be a departure?
I don't know.
Are we going to see a similar Picard in the TNG movies? Because a lot of people, I just get this feeling that we're going to get, I don't know.
I think a danger that I suspect they're going to avoid in Star Trek. One of the knocks that these movies get, that a criticism I've heard over the years when people talk about these movies, is that it falls prey to the temptation to turn Picard into an action hero, which he's very much not in the course of the series. Like, he's not a guy, fisticuffs, beat up the bad guy, rolling up the sleeves, action hero kind of stuff. And in the TNG movies, I think one or too many times he goes that route. Particularly, I think in Insurrection and Nemesis. I think I would like to see them avoid going down that route. He's 80 or whatever now, Picard. I'm hoping they don't continue that pattern. I hope he's back to being a more thinking man's character, which I think he still is in Nemesis and in Insurrection. I could do without the fisticuffs and the action stuff that I think movies kind of call for, which is a problem. I think that's part of the issue with TNG transitioning to movies. I mean, you're taking a show that's very much like a sort of a workplace drama in space at the end of the day, TNG, if you're going to boil it down to like its most basic DNA, and turning it into an action adventure show, which if you watch TNG, there's not a whole lot of action adventure. You have episodes, Yesterday's Enterprise.
There's a few episodes, right?
It's there. It's a part of it. It's Star Trek. But you have entire swaths of it where it's mostly people sitting around a table talking and solving problems and working together to solve issues without, firing phasers and becoming, adversarial with whoever it is. It's always the last resort. So yeah, I hope it.
The reason why I bring it up is just because they're saying 20 years after Nemesis, but how I see it going down, or how I expect to see it, maybe I'm trying to throw all those expectations out, is I think we're gonna see an all good things Picard rather than a action hero, like you say.
Mm-hmm. I think you're probably right.
Yeah.
I don't see them. I can't imagine he's action hero Picard. In Picard.
We'll see.
But you never.
We'll see. We'll see.
Yeah, we'll see. Who knows? They're talking about Janeway being a Nemesis touch, seeing her going straight to the desk job after the exhaustion of the Delta Quadrant mission.
Dom has a great line. She's done enough easy assignments.
Yeah, right. Yep.
Good.
She's well earned her desk job.
Yes.
Bureaucrat. But very cool touch to see her in Nemesis for sure. That's always a highlight of that movie. It's fan servicey, but it's good fan service as far as I'm concerned. Like, I am who I am. I'm never going to complain about seeing Captain or Admiral Janeway in Star Trek. So
and it's not like a long. It's really quick, so it's not like they take too long.
Yeah, exactly. So I'm very eager, obviously, to see where they take. I think you're probably. I hope you're right. Things connection with Picard, but I also I would like to see an evolution of what I was just talking about with Nemesis. Look at Picard and Encounter Farpoint, look at him in Nemesis, the more comfortable, relaxed version of himself, the more confident and comfortable with who he is. That's kind of Picard's arc, really. If you go through all throughout the show, he's a guy who is, on one hand, he's obviously brilliant, and he's kind of a Renaissance man. He's an archaeologist. He's a philosopher. He's got all these
He's a
interests.
Winemaker. He's got everything.
Yeah, he's got a lot of interest, and he's got a lot of lanes he's in, and he's good at everything.
Yeah.
And to Patrick Stewart's credit, he sells that in Picard. It never feels like hackneyed or, oh, of course he's good at this too. Like, it feels like he's naturally that. But Picard often struggles with flaw as a person, is kind of becoming comfortable with himself. He's you think of episodes like Cupid when Vash is on the ship. He's completely uncomfortable the entire time with being seen as any kind of he's got an image he wants to portray. He's not comfortable presenting anything but what he wants to portray. And like lessons, like there are these moments throughout the show where he's really kind of struggling with his identity and how he presents to people. He's not always comfortable in his own skin in every situation. But by Nemesis, I feel like he's gotten there. He's evolved and matured into a person who can be himself all the time. He doesn't have to button up and be the captain all the time. So I hope we see an evolution of that, though.
Yeah.
We have a question from Rob.
Okay.
Real quick, I think, before we double back. Will the next Trek Live be a Picard Episode 1 discussion? How do we answer that?
Well, if all things go, if the stars align and we can get this thing kicked off, Core Setting, our new show, will be primarily focusing on new Trek. So, Rob and everyone in chat, I think most are subscribed, so definitely go subscribe to that, because that's going to be where all the Picard and future new Trek is going to be covered by Bill and I. And then also you guys, because we're going to have a rotating guest a lot of the times. So I will jump into the next Trek Live. It will be solo update, just me. Bill will be on shore leave, as he said at the top of the show. Probably a Eisenberg update. If you guys don't know what that is, just tune in. It'll be fun. See what the work I've done on it. But yeah, I guess I'll just go over the schedule, because that was kind of confusing. Course heading will be on the 23rd. That'll be a Thursday, probably right after it gets released. Both Bill and I will watch it. Then you guys can hop on, come hang out. It will be probably heavily spoilers. And then the 26th, that Sunday, will be another Trek Live. So 2 shows, 2 great times to keep the discussion going. I had things to talk about.
I want to double back, if we can, a little bit to the chat. I'm curious to see what.
Okay.
We had a busy chat today.
We did.
Yeah. I see. Conversation about Dr. Soren. Interesting name, Dan.
Yeah. That's my wife's name.
To
be candid.
Yeah, so Malcolm McDowell as Dr. Soren in Generations. I find him to be... I have mixed feelings. I don't know. I think he can be a little cartoony at times, but I appreciate the... He's kind of an analog for a guy battling addiction. Like, he's single-minded. He's completely, he's going for what he wants, what he needs.
But you get it because one of the most strong-willed captains wants to stay there.
I know.
And he's trying to get
that
there.
kind of sells it.
Yeah, that sells it to me is
Mm-hmm.
Shatner's or Kirk's portrayal of wanting to stay there.
Yeah, he does really. Kirk, I think, sells Shatner's performance in the Nexus. I think sells the Nexus as well as any. I think McDowell's does too, and Malcolm actually Guinan does too. There's a scene in Generations where I think somebody mentioned this too. The use of Guinan in Generations. Whoopi Goldberg is the first thing that sort of that they use to kind of sell what the Nexus is in like a practical way. She describes it as like a warm blanket, like. It's time has no meaning. You can skip around. You can be where you want to be and live the life you want to live.
Makes it sound very attractive. Just
very attractive.
Even,
and then I think that's step one. And then when you see Kirk there and you see the struggle of we kind of know that kind of one of the things that works well about the movie is we kind of like Picard. Picard struggles with not having a family and choosing career over personal life. Kirk did that too, and in TOS even he's got these monologues throughout the show at times where loving the ship more than he can love anybody else.
So does Pike.
And so does Pike. Yes,
Jeffrey Hunter's Pike.
So this is what happens in these shows, and seeing Kirk struggle with having to turn that down, this thing he's been struggling to want time, and the thing that's kind of been missing in his life is I think the last cherry on top that kind of sells what the Nexus is and what makes it hard to walk away from. So the combination of McDowell's performance and the way he portrays it as sort of an addict who's obsessively he's going for what he needs.
Yeah.
And Kirk on his half of it too, I think is what makes the Nexus function. Let's see, what else do we have here? The joystick in Insurrection is another, like, to me that's kind of that goes hand in hand with like some of the data humor in Generations. Kind of a step too far, a little too much. Some people love it. I know people Thad does a cosplay with the Riker joystick, which is really cool. Some people dig it. I was never a fan. It never really worked for me. Insurrection has a good Admiral Dougherty, who is sort of the stand-in for the Federation Starfleet decision that I struggle with kind of accepting. Although I shouldn't, because it's certainly it's one thing in a long line of admirals, and whether it's Captain Kirk or Captain Picard or Captain Sisko, fighting back against the bureaucracy, kind of setting a bad course for Starfleet and the Federation. It's not the only example of it. So Ian and Rob are definitely fans of Insurrection, which I think is cool. Rob says about Nemesis, the Romulans coming to the Enterprise's aid at the end, I think that's the stuff that scratches my Star Trek itch the most in Nemesis.
Yeah,
those moments.
That's cool.
Yeah. Stuff with Riker and the Titan, the Scimitar is a cool ship. Yeah, there's a lot of good stuff in these movies. I think they're kind of a mixed bag. I think they get taken as a whole. The only one that I think really hits more than it misses is First Contact, like significantly more than it misses in my. I think the other movies are flawed in varying degrees, and are also like they have things about them that make them entertaining and successful on others, especially for people like us. If you're sitting here watching Trek Live, you're already predisposed to love Star Trek, and you want to be in that world and with these characters. So I think it's these movies check boxes that we're looking for, all four of them to some degree or another. Rob says he likes Dr. Soren's phaser and disruptor kind of phaser, that pivoting. That's a cool prop for sure. Definitely cool. One into as a kid, especially. I really always liked it. Yeah.
They are all, I think, Rob, right? They start with the motion picture and then they go to
they kind of wrap around.
And
they wrap. Yeah, they're not
Nemesis and the visible. TNG stuff.
I'll send you a picture, Rob. I'll post one on the Discord of sort of the whole ensemble. But I am going to ask everybody in the room if you're here.
Oh,
If you're still here.
I knew we were going to end with this.
I think I probably can guess everybody's because there's only 4 of them, and I kind of know where everybody mostly stands on Insurrection Nemesis or Insurrection Generations. Share your ranking of the TNG movies. What I expect to see. Is there a surprise in there somewhere? I'll tell you right now. For me, it's First Contact. Today, I'll say Generations 2, Insurrection 3, and Nemesis 4. That 2-3 is very. I could change tomorrow or later today. Think about it. Definitely fluid for sure.
I'm gonna break up Rob's.
Rob's got First Contact 1. Which is what I was curious about. I almost
yeah, I was
curious to see
he was
have Insurrection 1.
Yeah.
So Rob's is First Contact 1, Insurrection 2, Generations 3, Nemesis 4. That's kind of what I expected. You match, Dan, that set of rankings.
Great minds think alike.
Ian, Dom, if you're here, I'd love to see yours too. Ian's got First Contact, Insurrection, Generations, Nemesis. I think that's 3 for 3 or 3 for 4 if you count me. That exact stacking. Dom Perry, First Contact, Generations, Insurrection, Nemesis. My dad is going to say First Contact, Insurrection, Generations, Nemesis. That is in line with that standard, pretty common ranking. First Contact's just too epic. Rob's tempted to put Insurrection 1. Yeah. Pretty much what I expected to see. As far as that goes, I think that if you polled a big set of Star Trek fans,
yeah,
typical. That's what you'd see a lot of the time.
Yeah. Bill, talk about what you sent me for Star Trek content. Do you remember what you sent me on Snapchat?
Oh, cool! Yeah, there's a really neat featurette promoting Picard.
Yeah.
It's like 3 minutes. It's got some new clips in it that are really, really fun. If you're not completely violently opposed to like spoilers on any level, like you don't want to see anything, you should watch it. If you don't want to be,
I'm big on big spoilers, so I was really hesitant to watch it, but there was only like a few new clips, but what I liked most about it was that they had a specific intention to be different, to set themselves apart, to have this new identity and not be.
Yeah.
I don't know I don't remember how they put it, but it's just like a TNG reunion show. That's not what they wanted to do.
That's not what they did.
Yeah.
I think I'm really excited about that. I'm excited to see Star Trek sort of take on a different identity. I think it's notable that this is a show not named after a ship. It's named after a person, and it's a person's arc and journey. It's not a crew. It's not there are other characters in the show that I'm sure we're going to fall in love with and be interested to see. And yeah, Don Paris at the Trek Central Twitter posted a couple of actual clips from the show as well, like actual scenes. There's a couple like little minute-long sequences that are floating around out there, and you can get them on the Trek Central Twitter page. Dan's probably not going to go ahead and watch those, nope. But you can if you choose to, and there's some really cool stuff in there. But I'm really intrigued by a show that's completely, concerned with developing, like showing the arc of a person and not, the more traditional route of this is a crew and a family and a ship kind of a thing. I think that's going to be an interesting change.
Yeah. And for my Star Trek content, I'll talk about a Trek FM podcast that you guys may have heard of. It's called To the Journey. I don't know. They talk about 25 years of Voyager. So definitely check that out because I think that's along with the Picard stuff. A lot of people are talking about 25 years of Voyager as well. So definitely check that out. It's a good listen.
Yeah, I definitely will. I haven't listened to it yet, but I'll put it up. And then I would definitely also recommend, since he's here, especially the Trek Central team was covering the UK premiere of Picard, and Dom, who's here, was there. I think in our Discord channel, he shared that he was in the photographer's pit, taking photos and got to participate that way, and got to see the first episode of the show. So Trek Central is a really cool source of Star Trek news and information. Definitely check them out.
Yeah.
On Twitter, on Facebook, on at their website, Trek Central, and it's one of the good news sources out there for Star Trek content.
They quoted what episodes you should watch before Picard. I feel like there's some podcasts that you should listen to. Trek Ranks has a Borg episodes featuring our good buddy Rob. So that's a podcast that you probably should listen to as well before the Picard premiere, as we are on the eve of a new Star Trek show. So,
and I'll say this: I'm not gonna give any details. I don't know details. I'll just say this: I've talked to one person who saw the first 3 episodes of the show at the U.S. premiere. I got no spoilers at all. That person was very conscious and courteous about not sharing anything. A certain friend of the show, who's been a guest here before, and we talk about all the time, shared that they absolutely loved it and were very, very into it. So that gave me a lot of hope and a lot of excitement for what's coming. And I'm sure I haven't heard much from Dom, specifically about how he felt about the show from what he saw of it. But I'm excited. I'm very, very excited based on what I've heard. Now, at least one person who's seen some of it.
Yep.
Should be interesting and a lot of fun.
Yes.
Be excited.
I think we should kind of wrap it up. We just passed that hour mark, is usually our time to end the transmission. Yeah. You guys know the drill. The discussion does not have to stop here. Facebook. The Discord server is a big resource. I'll call it a resource because I think it's a really good place to keep the discussion going, along with Twitter, probably the two best ones. Then our new show, Course Heading. We'll cover all Picard and future stuff. So we'll see. I will see you guys next week. It'll be Thad and I on Course Heading. Bill will be modding the chat. So that should be a good time. Come talk about Picard and all things. It's going to be crazy on Thursday night. And then that Sunday will be another episode of Trek Live with just me. Should be fun as well. I think it's going to be a little bit on the shorter side. Yeah.
And then back to normal in a couple weekends.
Yes. Yep. All right, everyone.
Actually, yeah.
Yeah. Thanks for watching.
Yep. Thanks, everybody. Appreciate you stopping by and sharing your takes.